And hello YouTube, this is Thomas Judge back once again with another YouTube reading guide series. Today is the third proper video walking through the Top Cow Artifactiverse, or as some of you may consider it, the Witchblade universe. To create this reading guide, I have read the 902 comic issues that comprise the entire Artifactiverse, and more besides, and have used that knowledge to build the internet's most detailed reading map for this unique corner of modern comics. Now, during this series, I'll be using terms such as volume with a big V or small v, and I'll be referring to comic readers that are type P or type J, or I'll be referring to other companies and comic lines in passing. This can all seem a little overwhelming, but if you do need more guidance on what this all means, check out the introductory video in this series, which will explain all of these points. So the link for that is in the description below. So with no further ado, let's go here. This is the entire Top Cow Artifactiverse arranged into a reading map. Today we're going to be continuing our walk through the Artifactiverse by beginning the section that I've entitled here, the Origins Era. Please remember that this is my own name for this era of the Artifactiverse and not an official title by any means. Okay, let's begin. So the Origins era of the Artifactiverse starts where else with this iconic issue. This is issue 1 of Witchblade, a comic created by David Wohl, Christina Z, and Michael Turner. This is, I imagine, the reason many of you are here. Witchblade is one of the most iconic characters of 90s comics, and the longevity of her series is a testament to her popularity, quality, and ability to change and evolve as the appetite of the modern comic reader has grown and matured. Now, if we look at the map, the first collection we're going to look at is actually here. This beginning collection in the entire Origins era is this. This is called Witchblade Origins Volume 1. Now this is both a volume with a big V and a volume with a little v, and this moment is as good as any to tell you something quite important. You see, Witchblade as a series ran for 185 issues without ever being renumbered. In that sense, it was all one massive volume with a big V, or one continuous series if you like. However, and this is really important, there were several points in the life of the series where the numbering of the trade collections reset back to volume 1. What this means is that if you were to go into your local store or onto Amazon and look for Witchblade Volume 1, there are actually 4 different collections you would find. These 4 collections all collect different issues. In fact, on the map, you'll see one of them here, and then there's another one here, which would have Volume 1 written on the spine. There's another one here, which would also have Volume 1 written on the spine, and the list goes on. Don't worry, we will cover it all in a lot of detail. Now, whilst it's confusing, please don't panic. You can always work out what issues are collected in a trade paperback by simply looking at the back cover or checking the description. More importantly, as we proceed through these videos, I will be talking you through the various Volume 1 collections, and I will be showing you pictures to help you identify them, like you can see here. Helpfully, each of these reset numberings for the physical volumes is accompanied by a new subtitle, so each one has its own little sub-label that I'll be referring to as we go on. Okay, well, with no further ado, here, this image right here is volume 1 of Witchblade. It was originally just called Witchblade, but has retrospectively been re-released to have the subtitle of Origins, meaning that this volume is now called Witchblade Origins Genesis and contains issues 1 to 8. When they added this subtitle, they also re-released it with new cover art. The version I originally owned had a different cover. Next, moving on from this, is the trade collection called Witchblade Origins Volumes 2, that's volume with a small v, and that collection is called Revelations. This contained issues 9 to 17, has the same creative team, and is also great. Again, when they added this subtitle, they also re-released it with new cover art. The version I have has a different cover. It's important that you don't want to worry about what I'm about to tell you next, and that's that Volume 2 has an odd quirk that you can see here. And that is that the Devil's Reign crossover event we covered in my last video, the one that happens at the end of the Before the Rise era, that takes place between issues 11 and 12. Don't worry about it. You can stop at issue 11 and then read the Devil's Reign crossover if you want to, and that's cool. It's not collected here though, hence the dotted line. However, you can also ignore it and just read issues 9 to 17. The only way I even know the event fits in after issue 11 is because issue 11 ends with this image, which is frankly just a lazy publishing tease to try to get people to buy the event. This page has no bearing on anything that occurs before or after in the normal Witchblade series, so don't worry about it if you don't want to. I would also remind you that Devil's Reign won't make much sense unless you're reading it after having read most of the other comics in the Before the Rise era as well, of which there are 122 issues. It's the blue section you can see here that I covered in the last 2 videos. So understandably, if you don't want to do that, I don't blame you. Hopefully you can now make an informed choice as to what you want to do when you get to this part of Witchblade. Now, moving on, the next collection in Witchblades is this one with this image here. This is Witchblade Origins Volume 3, a volume with a small v. That contains Witchblade issue 18, Darkness issues 9 and 10, and then Witchblade issues 19 to 25. That is also the exact reading order, by the way, as the first 4 issues comprise the first official Darkness Witchblade crossover in an event called Family Ties. Now you'll see I've put Family Ties here in this little red circle here because it's actually collected in its own standalone trade paperback as well as elsewhere, but we'll talk about that in a second. It's also interesting to note that whilst this is the first official crossover between the 2 series, the reason I say that is because there was a cameo from Jackie Estacado, also known as The Darkness, in Witchblade issue 10 of that series, which is here. This was actually his first ever appearance in comic and served as a backdoor pilot for his own series, with a short Darkness prelude issue as well, which I'll mention in a moment. So that's Family Ties. It's its own trade paperback. It is massively out of print, and I don't have an image of the cover here. But we'll talk about that more in a moment. So if we just pan back for a second, I just want to take a moment to reflect and just look at this early era of Witchblade here. Now, these 25 issues contained in these 3 trade paperback collections have been collected in a variety of different formats, which we'll discuss at the end of the Origins era videos. However, it also represents a really nice series of story arcs. These 25 issues are all pretty much made by the same creative team, and it's largely down to the incredible debut this first 2 years of the series established, and to continue to survive through what is, I am sorry to say, what is now going to be a pretty long run you can see here of dotted circles, showing that the rest of the Origin era are unfortunately uncollected issues. Now, don't worry, the series becomes amazing again after this depressing lull that we're about to enter. What's worth noting is that the artist that really defined the Witchblade look, Michael Turner, left after issue 25, which is the last issue collected here, to form his own imprint at Top Cow called Aspen Comics, where he published an amazing comic called Fathom. More on this in the next video. Trust me, it's very important to remember, but for now, just keep it in the back of your mind. So like I say, we're about to enter a bit of a depressing lull. What I've done here with these issues that are in dotted lines is I've collected them by story arc, because frankly I think that's the best way to read if you're just reading in floppies and singles. I've named those myself, and so I will just talk those through over the next few videos. However, just to make this a little bit more complicated, I'm afraid, even for a type J reader like myself, we can't just read from issue 25 moving on to issue 26 and then read all the way up to issue 79. That's not how it works. Like you can see from this map, there's quite a lot of other stuff going on. There's quite a lot of crossovers, there's quite a lot of events, there's quite a lot of other bits and pieces. So I'm afraid what we need to do now is pause for a moment, having read the first 25 issues of Witchblade, and then we need to go elsewhere and look elsewhere in the Artifactiverse to understand what's going on. All right, so if you're following along, what I want to do next is actually go over to this part of the map where the darkness is, which is a time just a few months after Witchblade issue 1 launched. Now this is when Top Cow launched their second major and most enduring title, The Darkness, and that's what we're going to talk about next. So, written by Garth Ennis, drawn by Mark Silvestri, this series had an impact on the industry that was really similar to the impact of Witchblade's debut. And for a time, these 2 lines really were the heart and soul of Top Cow as a brand. It's one of the reasons why all the kind of 90s gruff militaristic comics, which were part of the this blue area, the Before the Rise area, kind of folded down to an end. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk more about Darkness, and much like the Witchblade series, the issue and volume numbering is going to get a little bit messy, but stick with me and we'll talk through it. So we'll start here with this trade collection. This is Darkness Origins Volume 1, volume with a small v, and it contains issues 0.5 and then issues 1 to 6. Much like Witchblade, it originally never had the Origins subtitle, but because of later weird things to do with the numbering of the collected trade paperbacks, volumes with a small v, remember, Top Cow made this retrospective change. Depending on which printing you find, covers may vary. After you read that first trade collection, we then have the second trade collection, which is called Darkness Origins Volume 2, which collects issues 7 to 8, Witchblade issue 18, Darkness 9 and 10, and then Witchblade 19. You've probably already immediately realised this is because most of this collection is taken up with the Family Ties crossover that we just mentioned here. What this means that the Family Ties issues are collected here in the Darkness, as well as that they're also collected over here in Witchblade. And then in the middle there, they had their own standalone collection. They really knew how to milk a crossover in the 90s. So once you've moved over from Darkness Collection Volume 2, we then have Darkness Origins Volume 3. Again, volume with a small b, and that's containing issues 11 to 18. Now that will then lead smoothly on into the fourth collection, which is Darkness Origins Volume 4, which contains issues 19 to 25. So similar to the last Witchblade issue we just looked at, which ended with issue 25, we have that here. I'll always have a soft spot for the issues in this collection, as issue 23, which you can see here, was one of the first ever comics that I picked up when I started getting back into comics as a teenager, and really have kind of a soft spot for that issue and that very iconic cover. So what we're going to do next is, much like the Witchblade, we are unfortunately about to launch into a long era of Darkness issues which are uncollected, hence the dotted lines. But you'll see I've again grouped them kind of arbitrarily, but really by the story arc, which means that really read them circle by circle by circle for the best reading experience. Okay, let's just dive straight into this. You'll understand why we're covering this before we go back into Witchblade as we go on. So the first arc we need to look at is the one I like to call the Necrobee. This is a slightly complicated one. Not only does it involve a crossover with Witchblade that we'll cover again next video as well, this crossover comes in the form of 2 one-shots with a very similar and confusing names. And then there's also another one-shot that you need to read before you read those. Listen, I'll explain, and I'll throw them up on the screen now to show you. This arc requires you to read the following issues: Darkness 26 with this cover, Darkness 27 with this cover, the Batman Darkness one-shot. Now, it is a one-shot issue, but it is pretty essential to the plot, at least if you're looking at things through the Darkness perspective. It's really good, with amazing art. Now, the fact that this is a crossover with DC is the reason you'll probably never see this collected anywhere ever again, but there are events in this which do then have quite a formative effect on Jackie's personality and his subsequent actions. That's followed by issue 36 of Witchblade, which you can see here. That's then followed by a one-shot comic called Witchblade Darkness. This is the cover. Don't get it confused with the next one-shot we need to read, which is called Darkness Witchblade, with the names in that order. I'm showing you the pictures so you know what you're looking for when you track these down. As the names are so similar, it's easy to get confused. And then finally, this story arc ends with Darkness issue 28. So coming back here to the map, well, let's move on to the next story arc. I like to call this one Get Carter, and that contains issues 29, 30, and 31. The next story arc I want to talk about is just this 2-issue one, which I like to call The Sister, and it's issues 32 and 33. And then the next story arc, which is issues 34 to 38, is one that I like to call Ripclaw, because it heavily features the character Ripclaw from the series Cyberforce. Now, if you've been following this guide in order and have already read the Before the Rise comics, then you'll know exactly who he is. Now, Ripclaw, you can actually see way up here, he has a couple of his own limited series because he's a main Cyberforce character. However, if you didn't read it, I don't especially blame you, to be honest, and it means that you just jumped in right here. That's absolutely fine. You should be fine reading it cold if you want to, although it is a bit easier if you're familiar with the Ripclaw character first. Now, I realize Before the Rise is 122 issues in that part of the map, but it's going to start becoming increasingly interwoven with Witchblade and Darkness as we progress. Anyway, that's the Ripclaw story arc, and then right here at the end we have the final Darkness story arc for now, which is called, or I call it, The Death, and it's just issues 39 and 40. And that's the end of our Darkness section for now. Now, the eagle-eyed amongst you may note there is still more Darkness to come during the Origins era. We're going to be looking at that all the way down here. But we need to read some other stuff first before we can really understand that. So we'll get to that in video 5. Next time we'll be diving back into Witchblade with a large detour at Tomb Raider along the way. As always, this map is available on my website for you to download free of charge. If you want to download it or print it out to follow along, please do so. It covers 902 issues, so I don't blame you. As always, please like, comment, and subscribe. As always, you can follow me on Twitter, where I tend to post a one-tweet daily review of whatever I've read that day. Given that I read on average around half a dozen comic issues a day, it's a great way to see what I'm up to and to get an idea for what future videos are in the pipeline. If you want to support the channel, it's easy. Head over to Amazon and pick up the first volume of my prose superhero novel, No Gods or Kings. It's a story about a world like our own, but where superhumans are a reality and how the world changes as a result. And it's planned as a series of 9 novels. The first 4 of them are already out, and they cost less than $1 each. They're free if you have Kindle Unlimited, and it would mean a huge amount to me if you were to leave a review of them as well. If you'd like to read a free excerpt of the first book, that can be found on the same website as this reading map, which is nogodsorkings.com. The link is in the description below. Until next time, everyone, stay classy.